Okay, folks, I going off for a little drive here to go to the coffee shop and work on some things, so I thought I'd get the film rolling. So I don't really have a, well, I guess there are a couple things I wanted to talk about. One, I guess we could call the myth of objectivity, and it relates to watches in that in the watch world, the watch community, there's sort of like this body of knowledge and viewpoints and ideas that are kind of considered to be the truth. And they, you know, when you get into any hobby or field or interest, you have to learn the ropes, right? You have to learn like the basics of it, whatever it is. You know, if you're learning how to play tennis, you have to learn the basic strokes and how to move and the rules of the game and that sort of thing. And then there are different perspectives on how you develop from there, how you become a good tennis player. And that's what, and the further you go, the more subtle differences and disagreements there will be. There's different styles of coaching, right? There's different styles of play. I'm a big tennis fan. I love watching tennis and following tennis and studying its history and the game and so forth. I don't play it. I would like to play it. I've played before and I really enjoy it, but I don't really have the opportunity right now. But you know, it has its own whole thing, and there's not just like a right way of thinking about things, about tennis. There's not one way to play. If you look at the three greatest players of the last 20 years, and possibly the three greatest players of all time, are Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic. Now, 20 years, you go back and you get into Andre Agassi and Pete Sampras, who are also on a level of greatness, especially Sampras. Agassi's a little bit below the rest of those other guys. But if you watch the game of, say, Roger Federer to that of Rafael Nadal, they're very different styles of play. Roger Federer is the consummate, skillful master. He plays with incredible elegance and beauty and grace, and he has a generally attacking game. He focuses on trying to win points. Whereas Nadal, they call him the Spanish bull because he's tenacious and stubborn, and he never gives up, and his approach is more defensive. He plays the war of attrition. He's kind of been struggling the last couple of years, so he's probably in decline. But he basically wears opponents down. He hits the ball enormously hard with incredible spin, and he forces the other player to hit errors. He does have some attacking, but he's not like Federer. Federer's more like the swordsman. He's like the fencer, you know, or the samurai. Whereas Nadal's more like the battle axe wielding warrior. And they're both incredibly effective. Now, interestingly enough, Nadal's style neutralizes Federer's style. He has an enormous matchup lead over Federer. It's sort of like the flaw. Federer is generally considered probably the greatest player, at least of the Open era, which goes back to 1968. But Nadal has beats him 2/3 of the time, and but Federer's overall record is better than Nadal's, at least so far. So it's an interesting thing, you know. Nadal's style neutralizes Federer's, or at least he's in Federer's head. But Federer is generally slightly better overall. He's had more slam titles. They're really both amazing, so it's hard to like really say one's better than the other. But my point again is, you know, to bring it back to watches, is, you know, there's this way of thinking that seems particularly prevalent in the watch world, but it's really prevalent everywhere, which can be described as the myth of objectivity, that there's one true way, and that when you're getting into watches, when you're getting into horology, you learn the ropes, and it's all about learning a static set of ideas, knowledge, information, and that there's a natural progression that everyone follows. One of the ways in which I've seen this again and again and again, and yes, I'm going to talk about Rolex, is this idea that all roads lead to Rolex. I call this the funnel effect, that there's like this funnel that you start off and you're, you know, and I'm saying this view is actually incorrect, or at least it's very narrow, thus the funnel, but that there's a diversity of views and everyone has different styles and tastes, but gradually it all narrows down to the true appreciation, true taste, which is that it funnels down to Rolex, which then narrows and goes to Patek Philippe, right? And this is why you see a lot of people, you know, they get into this mindset that you know, real watch collecting starts with Rolex. When you get a Rolex, you've really begun, and everything before that's just sort of like children playing with their toys, and then getting to Rolex is the beginning of the real thing, and that naturally leads eventually to a Patek or something else. You know, I think you could say a Vacheron or a Lange, that sort of thing. And you know, I'm not saying this is entirely false, that there's it's a worldview. I don't like to think in terms of true and false. I like to think in terms of different worldviews that make sense within their own logic, right? So it makes sense within its own logic, and that's part of my negation of the myth of objectivity, because the myth of objectivity would entail that there's one true way of looking at things, and I'd say that there are many different ways of looking at things that are all true in themselves, but also all have limitations. So for instance, in this viewpoint, you know, part of the problem of it is that the people that adhere to this viewpoint tend to think that it's the right one. They think I mean, we all think that our own viewpoint is the right one. That's why we have it, or at least it works for us. So, you know, but it seems to be this kind of large consensus among a chunk of watch people that really feel this way. And now, if you're listening to this and you're a fan of Rolex, you're a fan of Patek, and you don't fit this, that's fine too. I'm not saying that everyone that likes Rolex or Patek Philippe is in this funnel mentality. I personally, I mean, I would say that you know, there's other extremes of narrowness. There's people that are so anti-Rolex that they don't recognize them for what they are, and how they are a great brand, and they have such central importance in horology and watchmaking, and that they, you know, they make really amazing watches. They're not. It's not like Rolex is a complete mirage. There's a reason they're central. They are the classic brand, and they are more important and more significant on the total field of watch collecting than any other brand. You know what I mean? There's really no other brand. They're the Michael Jordan of watches in a way. So my disagreement though with this myth of objectivity, I mean, it goes well beyond watches. It goes, you know, because you could say that the entire world is enacting this war of who is right. You know what I mean? Like, whose viewpoint is right? Which perspective is the true one? You know, and you can see this in religious and political arenas, as well as philosophical. And to me, it's sort of ridiculous. It's sort of ridiculous because everyone is right and everyone is wrong. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying that it's completely subjective. I think that some viewpoints are more expansive and more adaptive and more evolved than others. So for instance, I'm saying that my viewpoint on this is a more expansive one than the funnel viewpoint, because mine still allows for Rolex to have its place, for Patek Philippe to be considered one of the great horology brands, but it doesn't limit, it doesn't reduce to that, right? Whereas the funnel viewpoint kind of cuts out everything else. So an example of this that I see come up time and time again, actually there was an instant on the Modern Watch Enthusiast Facebook page, and I don't want to pick on this one participant has his own channel. He's a really nice guy. He's not, I don't consider him a snob, but he was saying something akin to that his friend, you know, basically got into watches and buys really cheap watches and has one watch for every day of the week. And he was kind of saying, what did I do wrong? As a friend, as like a fellow watch enthusiast, because his friend is basically, you know, he owns only really cheap watches, and none of them are really quality horological pieces. But, and I just made the comment, well, if he's happy, what's the problem, right? There's no problem. If I mean, the bottom line is happiness, is well-being, is enjoying your hobby. So it's better to be a happy schmo who has nothing but Nixons and Invictas than sort of like a miserable old fart with your Pateks and Vacherons, right? Now, again, I'm just using this as a point of departure. I'm not the person who posted this. I think he kind of agreed with what I was saying. But I do think that this is an example, though, of how we do fall into this kind of myth of objectivity, that in the end, there's one way to really look at things. And of course, my way is the right way. And of course, my tastes are aligned with truth. Now, some people realize they might say, well, I'm evolving my tastes, I'm developing my palate, eventually I'll get there. But where is there? And that's sort of my question. Where is there? Where are we trying to get to? Where does the development and change of tastes go? And I would say it doesn't have to just go to this one place where we end up with our first Rolex and then we've started with real watch collecting. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's totally silly. It's so much more diverse than that. And the world is so much more diverse, so much more interesting than just this narrow funnel perspective and this falling into this myth of objectivity. So I would say that rather than saying that you know, people either fall into it or not, I'd say that we all fall into it to some degree. It's just to what degree? Because this is the foundational worldview of at least Western civilization since the Age of Enlightenment, since the 1700s, when we started exploring the world as a subjective, scientifically discoverable place. And we developed, and so it was all about, we just need to find it out there. We need to find the truth. And this started changing in the 20th century, really, when the subjective comes in, when postmodernism comes in. And this is a whole other cultural and philosophical conversation. But we still fall back into that objectivity. And some people fall too far into subjectivity, where it's like everything is subjective, it's all just a matter of personal opinion. Well, that's not necessarily true either. There are definable real differences in quality of different watches. So I'm just saying that we should really look at both the quote-unquote objective and the subjective and create our own worldview that serves us. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Later. You have to learn the basic strokes and how to move and the rules of the game and that sort of thing. And then there are different perspectives on how you develop from there, how you become a good tennis player. And that's what, and the further you go, the more subtle differences and disagreements there will be. There's different styles of coaching, right? There's different styles of play. The truth. And they, you know, when you get into any hobby or field or interest, you have to learn the ropes, right? You have to learn like the basics of it, whatever it is. You know, if you're learning how to play tennis, okay, folks, going off for a little drive here to go to the coffee shop and work on some things, so I thought I'd get the film rolling. So I don't really have well, I guess there are a couple things I wanted to talk about. I'm a big tennis fan. I love watching tennis and following tennis and studying its history and the game and so forth. I don't play it. I would like to play it. I've played before and I really enjoy it, but I don't really have the opportunity right now. But you know, it has its own whole thing. And there's not one, I guess we could call the myth of objectivity. And it relates to watches in that in the watch world, the watch community, there's sort of like this body of knowledge and viewpoints and ideas that are kind of considered to be